Okay, hi everyone. I hope you're all doing well. So just a few notes before I introduce Tarek. I wanted to share with you, can you hear me better now? Okay. I wanted to share with you some of the reflections we've been having regarding this event in the past few weeks. Obviously, we're all going through a unique, a stressful, a tough situation, both on the psychological, on the logistical, on the humanitarian levels. And there was this debate between the IFI team, Sarine, the ARI team, and everyone on whether we should postpone or not. And we eventually decided to keep the event, if not only to make a statement that even though people are trying, or parties are trying to paint this region as a region that is only a victim, we're here to show that this region is also a leader, that this region is here to contribute to international agendas. And we feel that we have the best speakers to actually highlight the potential of our country, our region, within this cross-cutting topic. Climate change is transcending borders. Climate change will intensify any conflict that is currently ongoing, unfortunately. So aligning agenda is making sure that we're all working towards the same goal is, or always should be, the priority. So to launch this event, we have the pleasure to have Mr. Tarek Alkhoury with us. Tarek has over 13 years of experience in the fields of environment, urban planning, and resource efficiency. He joined UNEP West Asia office in 2018 as the regional coordinator for resource efficiency and sustainable consumption and production, and since early 22, he's been acting as the regional coordinator for climate action. His multidimensional experience in environment, urban planning, land, sustainable development allowed him to gain solid knowledge on the interrelated relationships between resource flows, resource efficiency, circular economy, and climate change. He graduated as an architect from Damascus University, the Faculty of Architecture. He holds a Master's of Environment, Urban and Regional Planning from Reims University and a specialized Master in Project and Program Management from Schema Business School in France. Tarek, the floor is yours, and I hope you all enjoy this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Hi. Normally, we go and we say boring speech as UN. That's what we usually do. بس هالمرة هيك we'll do it casual, and especially that. Okay, can you hear me now? Heck, it's better. Okay, I was saying normally we go as UN and we do a boring speech, but now heck, let me have just a casual talk with you when it comes to preparation for COP 28. So this year is unique when it comes to the climate action work in general and COP 28. Because, and here I'm quoting our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, we are heading toward the climate hell. And the time of, let's say, a boiling climate, it's starting already. Why? Because if you are familiar with the climate change or the situation, you can see the impact of climate change everywhere, it's increasing. At the same time, according to UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme Emission Gap Report, we would need to reduce our greenhouse gas emission 45% by 2030 to keep the Paris goal alive. So Paris goal, I think everyone knows it, it's to keep the global warming to 1.5 or to 2 degrees. We will need to reduce 30% to keep the 2 degree alive. And now if you continue business as usual, we will limit the global warming by 2.8 degree in the mid-century, 2050. You can imagine where we will reach in 2100 year. So we are not doing well, and yet we remain optimistic because the science is here. Many reports, and this year is unique because it's a global stocktake year. So the global stocktake will take place this year according to UNFCCC mandate. The global stocktake will give us a clear vision, a clear view, or where we are when it comes to climate. How is the climate finance is doing? How much we are emitting? What are the urgent action in which sector to reduce emission, etc. So it all comes to reducing emission. Now we are here in Lebanon, in the AUB, and here I would like to take the opportunity to thank the AUB, the Issam Faris Institute, and the Arab Reform Initiative for inviting us. It's important to think about the climate action from Lebanon perspective, and especially when it comes to COP. So Lebanon, we can say we are confident to say that Lebanon is not a big polluter. It's not a polluter, actually. Lebanon emission is nothing. It's almost 0.06% of the global greenhouse gas emission. But Lebanon, like the region, like the Arab region, it's very vulnerable to climate change. And then UNDP did a very nice work on vulnerability assessment. So you can see the report that they have done. And also, I remember I was in many panels with Dr. Nadim, and we talked about those impacts in the region, and especially when it comes to Lebanon, on the water shortages, on the sea level rise, on the impact on agriculture, the risk for increasing the rainfall, etc. So it's important for us to realize that when it comes to climate action, adaptation for Lebanon is important. And we need to work on enhancing the adaptation work in general. Now the COP is happening in UAE, and this is the second COP in the region. This is a huge opportunity for the Arab state to unify position, to share what we are doing, but also to influence the global climate agenda. Sorry. So when it comes to this year, I think it's obvious, everyone realizing how much emission we need to reduce. Therefore, the first priority for the COP28 presidency is work on fast-tracking the energy transition. And they have many initiatives. One of them is 30 by 30, so reduce 30% or increase 30% of renewable energy by 2030. There is many talk and many initiatives on reducing fossil fuel as well, phase down or phase out. This language is still being debated, but maybe this is not very much related to Lebanon. What is related to Lebanon, it's the climate finance. We have, this is also one of the biggest priority for the presidency this year. So I don't know who's going to COP, but please keep an eye on the climate finance, because this is important for Lebanon. UNDP is doing well in helping the government in accessing the climate finance, whether from the Green Climate Fund or with the Green Environment Fund. And now we are working together on bringing some fund to work on water adaptation as well from Adaptation Fund. But the polluting country, or the polluting countries, or I have experience in that. Okay. The developing country, the developed country or the polluting country, this is not the right term, but I'm saying here between family, oh wow, that's a problem. Let's say the industrial countries had a commitment. They committed to deliver $100 billion for climate finance by 2020. And they did not meet this commitment. They are at the 87 billion only. This is an important note for the Lebanon and the Arab group and all the developing countries. And it's a point of discussion in every COP. The presidency this year will work on fixing climate finance to meet the old goal, but also to work on a new quantified goal to adapt to climate change, but also to work on mitigation at the same time. There is very much focus this year on lives and livelihood. And we will see the first ministerial ever when it comes to climate and health. The biggest outcome or the most solid outcome of last year was the advancement of the negotiation when it comes to creating a loss and damage fund. So the loss and damage fund itself, it's a very complicated item, but there was good advancement last year. I hope by this COP we will advance more. And Lebanon, unlike any other developing country, they need to be part of this discussion. because we are vulnerable, because we need to know once the loss and damage fund is operationalized, we need to know how to access it, and we need to know how to benefit from it. Of course, God forbid. The last point, and I think I passed my time, I'm not sure, but there is, and this is very much important for the audience here, which is the focusing on lives and livelihood. There is a call by the presidency to double the adaptation finance by 2025. There is focus also on climate and youth. So COP28 will have a pavilion for indigenous people as well, who make up 5% of the global population, yet protect 80% of our biodiversity. There will be also effort to establish the largest ever youth climate delegation program. And I hope we have good representation from Lebanon, so that young people, especially from less developed country and small island, are very much well represented. So I wish you good luck for this interesting discussion. I hope to see you in COP. It will be difficult COP, but we keep our hope high, because otherwise, I don't know what to say. But we keep our hope high, especially that the science is here. So we know what needs to be done. It's important for Lebanon to know the key element or the key articles that they need to focus on, and to benefit the maximum from the COP28 when it comes to learning about climate action and participating in the global discussion. Thank you.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you, Tarek. Thank you everyone for being here. First, just this is a bilingual panel. So for those of you who want translation, interpretation, you can find the headsets outside. And for those of you who are watching us online, please click on the bottom and you can have multiple languages. فالمداخلات اليوم باللغتين بالعربي وبالإنجليزي ففيكم تتسمعوا عليهم. I'm very happy to be here today. Actually, this is both American University of Beirut and IFI is very dear to me, as well as the institution where I am. I actually, in just an anecdote when we started this conversation, 17 years ago I had applied, it was a 2006 war, I had applied to a job, I was looking at it and I'm like, I want to work at the Issam Institute and I want to do an impact in this country. And we are in the midst of the war, and there was a huge pollution of the land, and many Israelis were, the war itself was impacting us a lot, and the oil spill. So I thought, so this was when I first applied and I started my career in 2006. 17 years later, we're still at war and still talking about environmental and degradation and wars and so on. It's fine. It's working. Okay, so going back to where we are today and why we're doing this panel. Okay, this is better. So I'm very happy as well that we, as the Arab Reform Initiative, we've taken a statement vis-à-vis the war in Palestine and vis-à-vis Palestinians, that today the life of Palestinians do matter. And when we're talking about environment, we cannot not talk about conflict, and how conflict is every day embedded in our lives, and how it is affecting the environment, the land, the water that we drink, the water and access, and the injustices that we keep on seeing every single day in our region. So as part of AUB and the Arab Reform Initiative, and with other colleagues that we have this series, it is important to note that why we are here today is also we cannot go to the COP if we don't look at the injustices that are there in our region. And the injustices will be much more for countries like Lebanon, for countries like Syria, for Palestine, Libya, and other parts of the region. So I'd like to say these few words, and then we'll definitely introduce this wonderful panel. And this is a series of 5 different institutions that came together. The AUB Nature Conservation Center, the Issam Institute here at AUB, the Asfari Institute, Arab Reform Initiative, and of course our colleagues from the Heirich Boll Stiftung. And we should be encouraging more these kinds of think tanks and solidarity in these times of conflict, where institutions should stand together to really change the discourse and raise issues on environmental justice. So Lebanon, in this last, as you have seen, today's meeting is about what to expect from COP28, definitive actions or déjà vu pledges. So I'd like to give also the credit to Camille Amoun and Leah for this wonderful title. But as well as Lebanon has always been part of the Conference of Parties. You may wonder why or what is Conference of Parties, and we'll discuss about it today. And Lebanon has been a member of the Arab bloc and has played numerous positions and in the role in the negotiations on a wide variety of issues and interests. So the Lebanese delegation here has also oftentimes distinguished itself by its willingness to include members of the Lebanese civil society actors. And now more than 100 civil society actors will be part of the national delegation, and we'll talk about it, what does it mean. So for example, in previous COPs, Lebanon has emphasized the danger of climate change posed by its livability, especially that it is, as a nation, is facing multiple and high levels of desertifications, and that adaptation and mitigation strategies are at the heart of green transition. In the last statement that the Minister Nasser Yassin mentioned during the COP26, it was stated that any recovery plan for the Lebanese economy must include and have climate action at its core. And during the COP27 as well, caretaker Prime Minister stressed that Lebanon is one of the countries highly affected by the impact of climate change. And studies prepared by the Lebanese Ministry of Environment have estimated that climate change will cause a decrease in Lebanon's gross domestic product and will exacerbate the current predicaments and crisis, which requires resolute action by everyone in the short and the long term. So this new COP, which is happening again in an Arab country, in this case in the United Arab Emirates, which is a major hydrocarbon producer and one of the world's highest producer and polluter per capita. So while the United Arab Emirates today has made improved efforts to improve its share of energy coming from renewable energy, such as solar, and expects to reach 14 gigawatt by 2030 of clean energy, there are still skepticism. It remains about their intention and seriousness in achieving these goals. Critics have pointed out that the entire Emirati economic model that is heavily reliant on tourism, air, transport, and fossil fuel is by nature unable to become green. Furthermore, a green transition today of this magnitude is bound to be extremely expensive, and doubts have been raised about UAE's ability to finance it without endangering its own economy. So here we want to look at the differences between climate finance and climate adaptation. And we've seen many pledges and many grants, sometimes pledges and consociational grants. And what does this mean? And we'll talk about it today, is also the difference between loans. Just to give a couple of figures in the context. The total amount today that is coming to the region approved between 2003 and 2022 is $1.6 billion for 164 projects. So this money has largely gone towards mitigation efforts, despite pressing adaptation needs in the region, especially for water conservation and food security measures. So of the total funding approved for the region, 648 million has taken the form of grants. And adaptation projects have all been supported by these grants. So we'll talk today, how are these projects adapted? So going back to now, so there are many concerns about this upcoming Conference of Parties and whether it runs the risk of serving as a platform for markets or even new lucrative technologies instead of serving the intended purpose of being a space for negotiation where countries, regardless of their standing, can take and make a difference and can make also their voices heard. So where does this leave Lebanon, which urgently needs concrete climate action and climate finance due to its environmental and political cost that is currently facing? So with us today, we have 4 panelists, and I'm very happy to have Camille Amoun on our left here. Camille is a policy advisor and writer. He has actually worked in Dubai and was a policy advisor to the government of Dubai. He's now skeptical about it, so it's great to have him with us. He's also a fellow here at the Issam Faris Institute, and his work on policy revolves around urban development and political economy, the urban metabolism, sustainability, and resilience. He currently works as a policy advisor and political analyst with various international organizations. Just so you know how the panel will go, we'll have one round of questions for the 4 panelists, and then a second round, and then we'll open up the questions for the audience and also the online audience watching us today. Our second speaker is Leah. Leah, also an AUB alumni. We were classmates back in the days. So Leah is the head of the climate change unit at the Ministry of Environment, which is mandated to design and implement national climate change policies in Lebanon. The unit also leads the national work on devising sectoral mitigation targets. And she has recently co-authored a book, actually, on why do neighbors have different environmental priorities, analysis of environmental risk perceptions in a Beirut neighborhood. Our third speaker is Nadim Farajalla. We attended the COP together back in the days. Nadim is also a director of the climate change program at the Issam Faris Institute. And many of you already know him. I'm not going to introduce him again, but in 2002 he joined AUB, where he is currently the director of the climate change program, and his current research focuses on the impacts of climate change and subsequent adaptation measures, including the role of the water, energy, food nexus. And our fourth speaker, representing youth voices and a climate activist in Lingo, Georges Ziede. So we'll start maybe with the first question with you, Camille. Given that you're skeptical about the COP, whether the COP will even take place or not in the region, who are the different leaders who will be taking part of it? And how are you seeing, now that you have a bit of a recul, you know, how are you seeing the COP at the moment and why its presence in the UAE makes it more skeptical? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Sarine. Thank you, AUB, for this invitation and this panel. Antoine was saying earlier that climate change intensifies conflict, but conflict also intensifies climate change for several reasons. And I think we can add this phenomenon to all the scientific feedback effects of climate change. Will it happen or not? The COP, we were talking earlier with a fellow panelist, and it seems that it's business as usual, but it's normal that it's business as usual, and it's very difficult to assess if the COP will take place, who's going to come. At this stage, it's very difficult. To the second part of your question on my skepticism on the UAE and GCC countries in general in embracing climate action, I will say a few words. If you aggregate net zero emission scenarios, this aggregation suggests that there will be a shift in the global energy mix around 2050 towards renewables, nuclear, away from fossil fuels. And GCC countries and the UAE acknowledge this, and they are in a very complex situation where different industries in history found themselves previously, where you have a decline in one industry and you have to move away from it and towards new technologies that are emerging. The difference is now that the impact of this shift is global, climate change being a global threat. So in this context, the UAE and the GCC are in this complex situation where they must navigate a shrinking market, or an expected market, a market that is expected to shrink, the fossil fuel market. If they behave as rational economic actors, they need to delay its decline and simultaneously prepare for the emergence of new technologies, without inadvertently, by investing too much in these new technologies, expediting their arrival. As a result, every initiative, action, or policy taken by Arab Gulf countries fall in one of these three categories: delay the decline of global demand for fossil fuel, prepare for the emergence of cleaner energy technologies, while at the same time delay the emergence of such technologies. So it's a very complex situation. Hosting COP28, which is actually the 4th Arab COP after Doha, Marrakesh, Sharm el-Sheikh, and Dubai, and with the context, maybe Dubai again next year because of Russia's veto. So in this context, hosting the COP for the UAE is only one way to accomplish and implement these three objectives, these three goals that I mentioned earlier. Other ways to reach these objectives are the increased diplomatic and financial clout in global fora. First, the G20, where Saudi Arabia is becoming more and more vocal. The BRICS, recently joined by the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And of course, the classical ones, OPEC Plus and the Arab League, but also in bilateral negotiations. Beside the climate diplomacy or the anti-climate diplomacy that is practiced by GCC countries, this approach is the race to cash in on their oil reserves before energy transition, which they actually acknowledge has become inevitable. To do so, they are betting on petrochemicals as a circumvention strategy that will allow them to continue to produce and explore. They are betting on carbon capture technologies. They are betting on nuclear energy. The UAE already have a power plant online. Saudi Arabia is working on it. And the conversation on, which is still a bit science fiction, but the conversation on geoengineering is picking up. And where it will be in 5 years, we don't know. But if it does pick up and if finance goes into these very dangerous technologies, the GCC will no doubt be bandwagon on it. So yeah, it's not very optimistic, but as rational economic actors, as long as they don't genuinely diversify, and we can talk about that later, their economies, they will remain not laggers on climate action and mitigation because they are interested in mitigation policies, but blockers on international climate negotiations.
Thank you, Camille. Not too optimistic, but then we'll go to Leah. This year, the Lebanese delegation has a lot of expectations at the same time, and it's a larger one of the largest in the last since the Lebanese government has been part of the UNFCCC negotiations. What role has the delegation has played in the previous COPs, and how and why this COP in the UAE would be different for the Lebanese delegation, in your own opinion? Leah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarine. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a bit more optimistic than Camille, as usual. It's true, Sarine, this year we have one of the biggest, actually it's the biggest delegation, Lebanese delegation, that participates in COP. What's the role that we play? First, it's very important to mention that participation in Conference of Parties is an obligation for the Lebanese government as a party to the UNFCCC. So as a party to the convention, we have to be represented, we have to participate, and we choose to be active in this fora. It's not just a participation, a diplomatic participation. A lot of countries just send their ministers of foreign affairs or the ambassador. In Lebanon, we have intentionally chosen to actively participate in the technical negotiations. Not because we want to and because it's our obligation, but because it's very important for us in Lebanon as the climate change team, as UNDP supporting the Ministry of Environment and the government, to know what's happening on the international scene so that we can better inform and better guide national policy making. During these negotiations and these COPs, so usually there's a document called a COP decision that is the outcome of each COP. Whole COP decisions are expected, parties are expected to implement them. If we don't know what they contain, what they include, and what it means in terms of implementation to our country, then it will be just a top-down approach, and we will realize in the middle of the way that we are not able to implement any of the decisions. So it's very important for us to participate, to understand, can this be implemented in Lebanon? Yes, no. If not, what do we need to implement a decision? A decision can be to reduce emissions, to prepare your nationally determined contribution, to have access to the funding that is mobilized. So this is what we have been playing, the role that we have been playing throughout the years, at least as long as I've been participating in COPs for the last 15, 16 years. This year, for the Lebanese delegation, it means something different, and this is what's nice about it. We have a large delegation. We have a high-level representation that is also rare, with the caretaker prime minister, and so far 3 ministers will be participating in addition to a parliamentarian, an MP. We have a very diverse delegation with representatives from NGOs, youth groups, women groups, private sector, think tanks, and this brings a lot of richness and diversity into the delegation. We are 49% gender, so there's a gender balance, 49% women participation, 34% youth participation. So youth يعني under 35 يعني أنا لا. But we also, this is not just and it's not by chance. We actively worked to have an equal 50%, and I hope that by the time we go, we will be reaching 50% gender balance and more than 35% youth. And the nice thing about it, Sarine, if you ask different people what a COP means to them, or at least COP28, it has different meaning. Some people go to meet peers. Some people go, and NGOs going to just to disseminate, to be visible, to tell the world what they are doing in a small country like Lebanon. Others, they go to network. But the one thing that is certain, everyone goes to COP, or to COP28 specifically, to learn, to get new knowledge, to network, to understand what this means to a country like Lebanon, and most importantly, Tarek said it, to get inspired from what others are doing so that we can also be as active and as efficient as possible.
We'll come back to you, Leah, around the COP, but now we'll jump to Nadim, sitting at the end. So the climate crisis at the moment, it might have reached a point of no return. Yet successive COPs have been unable to offer strong solutions to it. And instead, we've fallen into a victim of paying lip service or to insufficient pledges. From a scientific perspective, what does this COP need to do actually to have a positive impact on combating climate change? Nadim.
Thanks, Sarine. I want to say that I vacillate between being pessimistic about COPs and optimistic. But if you look back at when we started, we were together in the Copenhagen COP, 2009, was it? Yes, and look at where we are now, and you see there's a huge change. Okay, thank you, sorry. The change is huge, and it didn't happen in one COP to the next. It was incremental improvements, and these are the good things that we can see happening. So there is never going to be a strong solution because politics come into play, and there are governmental and national interests at play. Economies of countries come into play. Camille, he said about, talked a little bit about what it means for the oil-producing countries, for in terms of carbon taxes, for example, in Europe, or the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. and the capping on the use of fossil fuel, Europe's Green New Deal, again, what it means on capping on any industrial production. this has impacts on other countries. So the changes have to come in bits and pieces. Now there is the issue of pledges. This riles me up big time. If you look at just last few days ago, the US government submitted to its Congress a request to fund Ukraine and Israel for $105 billion. It's going to happen soon. It has never happened. This 100 billions that Tarek talked about, the 100 billion, starting way back in the late 90s till 2020, it never made it. And from many, many countries. So the US alone was able to earmark 105 and send it out. So the pledges, this is a real shame, and this is where we need to focus a lot of our effort. And I believe strongly in naming and shaming countries that pledge and don't live up to their pledges. We have to do that. We being everybody that's committed to the COP process. Whether it happens at the COP or outside the COP, it doesn't matter. Now the role of science. Science plays a major role. The driving force behind climate science is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, from which the UNFCCC came out. They have been doing fantastic science work, really top of the line. And a lot of it they're trying to get to policymakers through policy briefs, executive summaries aimed at policymakers. Yet still, what we find being problematic is the money that goes into helping developing countries implement these pledges. And what is worse is whatever money is committed, it's the political strings that are attached to this that shackle any kind of work that happens. So science is really at the basis of a lot of work, and it can and should be able to help us work through things. Camille also mentioned something about geoengineering. This is the biggest elephant for me in the room. Geoengineering is a cop-out. It's like your carbon trading for me. Carbon trading is allowing countries to keep, or institutions to keep polluting while others are limited. This should not happen. Geoengineering is not a sure deal. It's just kicking the can down the road and looking for things to happen later. Similar to nuclear power. What do we do with the nuclear waste? What about accidents, nuclear accidents that happen? This shouldn't be allowed. So geoengineering should be supportive to the pledges that we make, and it should not be a cop-out. COP28, already people are talking, and the presidency of the COP is talking about phasing down fossil fuels, not phasing out. And this should be the basis. Phasing out fossil fuels and looking at how we can incorporate geoengineering into that process rather than relying on it to allow us to keep producing, keep on emitting while just capturing the carbon and thinking of what to do with it later. Thanks.
Great. A bit of optimism and pessimism at the same time. But looking back, maybe here to you, George, given the space of the UAE, what does it mean for civil society groups and for activists to be in this space that usually our spaces are now shrinking in our region? So what does it mean for civil society groups? And do you create coalitions with other groups from the region and outside of the region?
صح. نحن اعتبرنا بآخر 2 كوب أو بالأخرى الكوب الماضي وهيدا الكوب كنا جدا محظوظين بمطرح معين تنضوي على مشاكل المنطقة بحد ذاتها، لأنه هن كانوا اثنيناتهم بالمنطقة عنا. سنة الماضي بشرم الشيخ، هيدي السنة رايحين على الإمارات. هاي كانت فرصة لحتى نضوي على منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا. برضو رغم هيدا الشيء السنة الماضي يعتبر أو يسمى كان بكوب أفريقيا، ففعليا نحن بدبي رح نكون بكوب الشرق الأوسط، وأكثر من هيك رح نسميه الكوب العربي. هيدا بيعطينا دفع لحتى نكون عم نشتغل أكتر على الأمور اللي نحن بدنا نضوي عليها بالمنطقة. اللي بدي أقوله الحركة اللي صارت بخلال هول السنتين يلي مرقوا هي التعاون اللي صار بين الأغلبية المنظمات الشبابية اللي بتشتغل بالقضايا المناخية على صعيد المنطقة ككل، من المغرب لتونس لمصر. سنة الماضي وبهيدي السنة الماضي كان الدرس الأكبر إنه هالمجموعات هيدي تجمعت بقلب الكوب، يعني تعرفت على بعضها، عملت خطط التحرك تبعها لرفع الصوت على قضايا المنطقة خلال الكوب هن وبقلب الكوب. هيدا الشيء خلق ديناميكية معينة عند كل هول المجموعات لحتى نوصل لهيدا السنة انه اوريدي في خطة عمل موجودة لها المجموعات هيدي والجمعيات والمنظمات حتى تروح على الكوب وتكون عم تشتغل على هيدا الاساس. هلا نحن هون بنحكي شوي انه وكان في كتير حكي انه هيدا الكوب شو بيفيد او نحن ليش بنروح على الكوب طالما عم نشوف انه ما في نتيجة، لانه اي ناشط بالقضايا المناخية اذا بتحكوا معه بيقول لكم هيدا سيرك او هيدا شيء بنروح عليه مسرحية. في شيء منه اكيد، بس انه رح نقول شغلة، هيدا المطرح يلي فعليا بنقدر انه نحن نتوجه عليه ونرفع الصوت ونضوي على الامور. هل عم نجيب نتيجة ايه او لا؟ يمكن هلا دكتور نديم حكي انه يمكن بال 2009 نحن وين كنا وهلا وين صرنا. صح، هو ولا مرة بالكوب تاريخيا كان في انتصار كبير انه نحن حققنا هيدا الشيء واتخذ هيدا القرار الكبير يلي رح يساعدنا لحتى نحن نغير توجهات البلدان ورح نغير العالم اذا بدنا نحكي بالشعارات الكبيره. ولكن دائما في انتصارات صغيره، فكل سنه وهيدي هي المشكله. بس هون الخيار اللي هلا بنحكي عنه انه كل سنه في عنا انتصار صغير بيتحقق. السنه الماضيه كان اللوس اند دامج فاند باي اكزامبل يلي هو يعد انتصار صغير، ولكن كانوا جميع النشطاء عم بيشتغلوا عليه لسنين قبل ما يوصل لمطرح انه يقدروا يحكوا فيه ويتناقشوا فيه ويتخذ قرار فيه. هلا تمويله هون صار قصة تانية، وبعتقد هيدا الضغط يلي هو رح يكون هيدا السنة. اكيد كمان نحن بيصير في قرارات بتتاخذ بالكوب والناشطين بيحسوا بهالانتصارات الصغيرة يلي عم بيحققوها، بس كمان بذات الوقت وللأسف إذا بدنا نحكي فعليا وتاريخيا في قرارات عديدة. يعني إذا بنجي بنحكي هيدي ورقة الكوب أو الورقة الختامية، القرارات الختامية يلي بتطلع من الكوب يلي كانت عم تحكي عنها ليا، إذا بنجي بنحطهم هيك حد بعضهم عبر السنين بنشوف إنه في قرارات اتخذت وهي قرارات جدا مفيدة، يا اما تحقق جزء بسيط منها يا اما انتست وصار صرنا عم نلتهي ب قضايا تانية نحن صرنا عم نشتغل عليها. نسينا القرارات اللي اتخذت يلي هي ما تطبقت او تطبق جزء بسيط منها، وصرنا عم نركز على مواضيع تانية لحتى نشتغل لحتى نكون عم نحققها. فهون في هيدا القطع دايما بالقرارات اللي بتتاخد، وعم بتصير القصة مش العبرة انه نحن ناخد قرار ونطلع بهالورقة الختامية والبلد المستضيف هو يبرهن انه هو عمل قمة ناجحة بس، انما هي العبرة الاكبر هي بالتنفيذ يلي هون عم بتكون مكمن الصعوبة. وهيدا كمان بيعود اول شيء للسياسات الخاصة للبلدان الكبرى يلي هي عم بتدير الدفة كلها، وتاني شيء حتى السياسات اللي بقلب هيدي البلدان يلي هي بتتغير عبر السنين. يعني نحن اليوم إحدى الدول الكبرى بيجي عليها حكومة أو رئيس بيكون هو داعم لما يعرف بمجموعات الخضر مثلا، وهيدا الرئيس بيروح بعد 4 سنين خلال حكمه بيكون هو داعم لقضايا معينة لتمويلات معينة لقضايا مناخية معينة، وبيتاخد قرارات على هيدا الأساس. بيجي الرئيس اللي بعده ممكن بس بقرار واحد يكون عم ينهيها، وهذا شيء بعتقد اختبرناه مؤخرا من دون ما فوت هلا باسامي الدول. فهول كلها تحديات بالنسبه لنا عم نواجهها. بنعد نحن انه يمكن كناشطين هي أكبر منا لأنه هي بتدخل ضمن قرارات كتير كبيرة، ولكن وجود هول الناشطين وخاصة هلأ بهالسنتين وجود الناشطين العرب بالتحديد وناشطين المنطقة بشكل عام بقلب الكوب عم بيخلق ديناميكية معينة، عم بيخلق تواصل معين، وبنتأمل انه هيدا التواصل مع الوقت يكون شوي شوي عم نوصل لنتيجة تقدر تفيدنا وتفيد البلدان يلي نحن جايين منها.
اوكي ثانك يو، شكرا جورج. رح نرجع على موضوع النشطاء وكيف كمان بيشتغلوا وكيف بيستعملوا المساحات او المساحات الدولية والاقليمية بالوضع اللي نحن كمان عم نمر فيه، وشو التحديات اللي كمان عم بتواجهوها، وشو المطالب كمان اللي عندكم اياها، وكيف عم تعملوا الديناميكيات والتكتيكات كمان على الارض. بدي jumping back to English and going back to the UAE and here to Camille. If we look at the UAE's unique diplomatic standing in the world, given those negotiations a chance to be at the moment to be more successful, is it possible that it can be a more successful one than the usual? And another question around, does the UAE's position as a global financial hub mean that this COP will be a bit more glorified commercial expo for private companies to invest? And what is the UAE's main motivation? You've said it in the beginning, but to reiterate again, at least in the part, is it motivated by the desire to center itself and position itself in the narrative of international climate negotiations and climate finance?
Yes, as I said, and again, I'm not very optimistic, especially about this COP. Yes, the objective of the UAE is to position itself on the climate negotiation. Before COP, when the UAE was still applying to host the COP28, the conversation was, the question that we're asked in the climate community, is the UAE applying to hijack the climate agenda, the global climate conversation? Now, to give a bit of optimism, as a climate community, what can we ask from these countries, the UAE and the GCC? And you said it, it's climate finance. The main asks should be on financing more loss and damage through the fund, not through bilateral agreements and donation that are usually very politically oriented. And also on R&D away from technologies that are, as Nadim said, pushing the can. And without talking about geoengineering, even carbon capture. Carbon capture is pushing the can. And they are investing a lot in carbon capture and storage. So yes, loss and damage and short-term R&D for short-term impactful and efficient technologies. Now, just a word on mitigation. Gulf countries are very interested, and it's part of what they're doing, and they're investing a lot in mitigation policies, green buildings, electrification. They include nuclear in that with all the risk and the bad element that it implies. Why do they do that? Because mitigation policies mean they burn less fossil fuel locally and sell more fossil fuel globally. So they invest a lot on mitigation sincerely, and it's a good thing, but for the wrong reasons, because at the same time they increase their exploration and oil and gas production and hoping to sell more on international markets.
Great, we're talking about climate finance, and here going back to Leah, what are your, as a Lebanese position, what are the different expectations when it comes to climate finance, knowing that Lebanon has already a lot of debts? Are we going to receive more loans, and in what format? So what are your main expectations when it comes to the climate finance, and also the position of Lebanon vis-à-vis other Arab countries? It is part of the Arab bloc, also of the G77 plus China. What will be the position at the moment when it comes to climate finance, but also the bloc itself?
With respect to climate finance, we have always had the same position, which calls for increased climate finance, increased access to climate finance, specifically for developing countries. Lebanon is not a least developed country. It's not a developed country, so usually developing countries fall in the middle. Although we have high needs for mitigation, for adaptation, for recovery, for loss and damage, but we always want to make sure that any conversation that is related to climate finance does include all the different categories of parties, including developing countries, which Lebanon is one of them. Concerning loans or grants, this is not something that usually is discussed in COPs and in negotiations. بيحكوا إنه this should be, the climate finance should come from public sources, private sources, and this is a big debate in terms of what is the source. You have countries who are refusing to have any climate finance being incorporated or calculated as part of the 100 billion that comes from private sector, for example. It is required and they request the climate finance to come from public money, right? So from government pockets to pay their dues, quote unquote. We don't specifically push for this. We don't block such discussions, and this is something that happens a lot in the League of Arab States negotiations, but we have different views on climate finance. It's very important to have, again, equal access, and if it's grant or loans, usually this is done at the national level, right? You have the Council of Ministers, they are the eligible entity and the body that agrees or refuses loans. Sometimes it makes sense, and you have the Minister of Finance, which is the entity responsible and has the mandate to approve, to advise to go for loans or not. And then you have the Council of Ministers, which is represented by all parties and by all ministries. أكيد, as a Minister of Environment, we highly discourage using loans in climate finance. I think grants, and I think there's a lot of other financial mechanisms that we can benefit from other than loans. For the League of Arab States, we do belong to the group of the League of Arab States. We also are part of the G77 and China. We do have a lot of convergence points with the two groupings. We do also have our differences, but this is not something that blocks the interaction or the communication or the interaction within the group. We shouldn't forget that the group is very heterogeneous, and in the League of Arab States you have LDCs, so least developing countries like Sudan, for example. You have countries that are in Africa, so the MENA and North Africa. You have countries, you have the GCCs that have a completely different income, different economy, different interest. You have the Near East, the Levant area. So by nature, working within such a heterogeneous and different interest groups, it's challenging. When we have differences, we do try to solve them bilaterally under other, for example, through the Cartagena dialogue, which is this informal grouping where we find convergence on items that we can push together, or you can work on them bilaterally with, at the national level with donor agencies without really going back and negotiating or sharing it, if you want, within the League of Arab States. And this is what we have done for the NDC, by the way. So when we did the nationally determined contribution, the tendency, if you want, of Arab countries with GCCs, no, let's not be ambitious. And no, let's put the bare minimum in terms of how much we can reduce. We had a different perspective. We wanted to solve the problem of electricity, of energy, of transport, and if this is the way, and if we can mobilize funding and effort and momentum nationally to do it, we will do it, and we will be ambitious. And we have one of the most ambitious nationally determined contribution of the region.
Okay, thank you, Leah. We'll go back to also the NDCs and their mechanisms of implementation, but I'd like to give the floor to Nadim vis-a-vis the pledges you've talked skeptically about the pledges, but also during this COP, how they should be updated, and how, in your own perspective, what would be, in an ideal world, which we are not really living in it, what would be the mechanisms in the COP that would be able to allow this mechanism?
This is a loaded question. I don't think I can answer it صراحة. لأنه we've been trying since Kyoto to find mechanisms for getting money to reach the designated beneficiaries. It has not happened. I don't think it will happen. What I'd like, you talked about earlier about the fragile countries and the fragility and how we want to work within grants. Let's keep in mind that most of the countries that get funding are least developed or developing countries. Most of these countries are in debt, and a big chunk of their economy goes to debt servicing. And this prevents these countries from investing in climate action as needed. To me, the only way out of this dilemma is to reduce the debt service of these countries and allow them to start incorporating climate action into their national budgets. Once that starts, but not only through the national budget, the government should not be the great donor. It should be a facilitator and a trigger and an incubator to allow businesses to flourish in this sector. So it has to bring in the private sector and weave them into the mesh of getting the finance sector in. Now, one note, there are different numbers, but one very conservative number says that if you invest $1 in adaptation, $1, you will get a return on it between 2020 and 2050, I think. You will get a $4 net benefit on that. Numbers can go up to $7 to $8. So it is a net benefit that we're talking about. And this is great investment. How do we do this? We start working with the possible and the low-hanging fruits. For us in Lebanon, through our experience at IFI, we have seen that working with municipalities, but not, let me emphasize this. We work with municipalities, we get the greatest impact on our buck, okay? But these municipalities should not be working within their own sphere. They should not be, singing their own hymn. They should be part of the general direction with which the nation is going into. So it has to be in accordance with a central government plan for climate action. Also, when you mentioned earlier in your opening remarks that Lebanon's Minister of Environment pushed for the greening of the recovery plan. Well, actually, we at IFI had a major contribution to this greening of the plan. We helped identify sectors within which work was to be done and how that work should be done. This is easy. The amount of investment, for example, if you look at tourism, tourism is a net dollar importer. Even without doing anything, the government, by the expatriates coming in, they bring their dollars in. What if we go through ecotourism and greening of our tourism and greening of our taxi fleets and bus fleets, etc.? All of this requires some investment, but the money that comes in and the net benefits and the co-benefits that are associated with this are immense. That's only with one sector. Imagine if we do that to other sectors. So it's important also to realize that when we're talking about fragility, it's governance related. It does not necessarily mean it's conflict. It is eventually leads into conflict. But when we're talking about governance, we're talking about rule of law, we're talking about accountability, transparency, justice, and equity and fairness. When these are present, fragility is reduced, resilience is built up, and you can move forward on that. So this allows you to have fiscal and financial strength on which to stand. And then this again comes back to my first point. We are then able to weave into our the mechanics, whatever they are, into making funds available for climate action. Thanks.
Thank you, Nadim. I mean, you've raised a couple of different points, fragility, but also equity and transparency and governance. But we'll go back to George about also the spaces. You've mentioned before, أو نحكي بالعربي، قبل شوي كنت عم تحكي عن المساحات وبالمؤتمرات الأطراف. بنسبة هلأ بالوضع اللي نحن فيه كمان بلبنان والوضع المنطقة، شو رح يكون في شو البوزيشنز المواقف اللي رح تاخذوها كمجتمع مدني كجمعيات شبابية كمان على مواضيع مختلفة عن النزاعات وغيرهم يعني حاليا؟
تركي شوي. اوكي. صراحة هو هذا الموضوع هلا نحن بإطار النقاش فيه. أكيد نحن صار في لنا أسبوعين الأولويات تغيرت بالمنطقة، أولوياتنا نحن حتى تغيرت، مش بس على هيدا الصعيد، يمكن حتى على حياتنا الشخصية. أكيد هذا الشيء رح يعكس طريقة العمل يلي حتكون عم ينشغل فيها للكوب 28. رح كون كتير صريح، دايما في صعوبات لما نحن نحكي نكون بقلب المنطقة العربية بالتحديد، ونكون بدنا نرفع الصوت تجاه أي قضية، لأنه هي هيك الأنظمة اللي موجودة، هي هيك لأنه دايما في خوف من المجموعات يلي بترفع الصوت. فنحن كتير عم نكون دقيقين وكتير عم نكون منتبهين، خاصة بلبنان. طبعا لأنه كمان انفتح لنا مجال من قبل الوزارة أنه نكون جزء من الديليجيشن تبعها، فنحن كتير بدنا ناخد هيدا الشيء بعين الاعتبار بالطريقة اللي رح نكون عم نرفع فيها الصوت. الأكيد أنه من سنة الماضي كان في هيك شعار أطلق خلال الكوب بإحدى الوقفات يلي كانت بتطال الشعوب الأكثر استضعافا بالعالم، أنه النضالات لا تتجزأ. يعني أنت لما بتآمن بقضية معينة إجباري تاخدك لحتى تكون عم بتآمن بقضية تانية، فكيف إذا الموضوع بيتعلق بالإنسان؟ وفي بس هيك إحدى الأفكار اللي كانت امبارح عم تنطرح بأحد الاجتماعات، انه نحن اذا بنطلع هلا فعليا على الشيء اللي عم بيصير بمنطقتنا وبنطلع على الواقع المناخي او على المسببين للضرر المناخي كدول عظمى ودول كبرى، هول هن ذاتهم يلي هن مطالبين هلا بدفع الاضرار للشعوب الاكثر استضعافا والاكثر تضررا من موضوع التغير المناخي يلي عم بيصير. هن ذاتهم هن اكبر صناع للحروب وللأسلحة التي تستخدم بالحروب. فهي مش بس مساهمة بتدمير هيدا الكوكب، إنما كمان مساهمة بتدمير الإنسان بهيدا الكوكب. فهيدي النقطة حساسة كتير، ورح يكون في طبعا تحركات حتى بموضوع القضايا المستجدة هلا على ساحتنا بقلب المنطقة. ومثل ما قلت وجود الكوب بهيدي المنطقة بيساعدنا لحتى نضوي على كل القضايا يلي هي بحاجة انه تتضوى. اكيد ضمن الاطر يلي هو مسموح لنا انه نكون عم نستخدمها، لانه نحن ملتزمين باحترام قانون البلد يلي هو رح يكون مستضيف لنا. هلا بشكل عام الكوب، حتى الناشطين بالكوب يلي هن بيحضروا من سنة لسنة أو بيبعتوا الديليجيشنز تبعهم كمنظمات، اتطور العمل من أنه يكونوا أشخاص فقط واقفين وحاملين البانر المحطوط عليها نو وشارة حمراء وهن المعارضين دايما، يعني شو ما صار هن دايما معارضين، لأنه يكون عندهم فعالية أكثر حتى ضمن المفاوضات يلي بدها تصير او يلي عم بتصير. فتطور حتى عملهم من فقط أشخاص هن لا يتظاهروا لا يعتصموا لا يعملوا تحركات فاعلة على الأرض، ليكونوا فعليا هن أشخاص عم يقدروا يطرحوا أفكارهم على الوفود المشاركة، عم يقدروا يطرحوا ضمن ورش عمل معينة أفكار جديدة ممكن أنه تطبق وطرق جديدة ممكن أنه تطبق، وبيضلون هن الصوت اللي عم بيجرب يدفع للأمور تتمشي بطريقة أسرع. ما تضلنا صار لنا نحن 28 كوب، يعني كوب 28 يعني 28 كوب وزيدوا عليهم سنة كورونا، عم نحكي نحن ب 29 سنة عم نمشي كل سنة فشخة بطيئة فشخة بطيئة، بعدنا لهلا ما قدرنا نوصل للمطرح اللي نحن بدنا اياه. بدي بس تاخذوا ما بقى رح طول، رح اقول بس انه عن المساحات اللي سمح كوب بشرم الشيخ والكوب اكثر بدبي اللي جايين للشباب العربي وشباب منطقة الشرق الاوسط وشمال افريقيا، انه بالدرجة الاولى يقدروا يخلقوا نوع من الاتحاد بيناتهم. وانا هلا بعرف انه في اتحاد معين تشكل مؤخرا، رح يكونوا كل البلدان العربية ممثلين فيه، وهن رح يكونوا موجودين بالكوب ويحاولوا انه يكون في عندهم تحركات مشتركة ولقاءات مشتركة، كما انه عم بيحاولوا التنسيق مع وفود دولهم كرمال يجربوا يلاقوا هالنقاط المشتركة يلي يقدروا اثنيناتهم يطرحوها أكيد كرمال الأفضل بلدانهم ومنطقتنا. شكرا.
Okay, شكرا جورج. We're going to open the floor for questions from the audience since we have some time, and then also take any questions that are online. Any questions, maybe? Maya? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, we will ask you to keep the questions short if possible and straight to the point. Thank you.
Okay, so I have 3 questions. The first question is climate finance, mitigation versus adaptation. We always see that mitigation has been given a higher proportion. So is this something we want to talk about as we approach COP for Lebanon, that we need more climate finance towards adaptation? Another thing is climate finance. We always see climate finance as our top priority. Is there something else we also want to talk about? Is there something else that is a priority other than climate finance? And number 3 is about debt swap. So we were talking about the loans that we have because of the finance that we have. There is some topic that came around that I learned about. It's called debt swap, how countries could swap their debt and instead of paying money, they have to do something in relation to adaptation, and that way they are paying back their debt. So I'm not sure if we could, somebody can discuss that more. And thank you.
Okay. Any other question we can take? It's already quite a lot. Maybe Leah here around the different climate finance and adaptation and the debts and any other topics related to...
Definitely climate finance is always a priority and has always been a priority. And we do prioritize funding and climate finance for adaptation. We have to take into account, Kamena, sometimes when you take in absolute terms investments that mitigation measures need versus investment that adaptation measures need, you see that inherently measures are more costly. Then you have more technology to deploy. Most of the mitigation actions need big technologies, whereas you see that a lot of adaptation actions are more into governance, are more into soft skills, are more into capacity building. Akid, you have infrastructure, you have equipment, you have you can have some costly if you want measures. However, in general, you see more money going, but also more loans going to mitigation. So when you talk about climate finance, more money, but more loans into renewable energy or into mitigation actions. لأنه also these are usually projects that are feasible, cost efficient, and they have a specific payback period where you start saving money or generating revenue, which is not always the case in adaptation. So under adaptation, you have to internalize externalities and really to have a project that is cost efficient, it really has to make business sense. But having said that, we do, from a political stand, we do push and we do prioritize climate finance going for adaptation and not for mitigation, or at least equally. In a Green Climate Fund, they have 50-50, and they have quotas, and they try to stick an adaptation fund and all the rest, even Jeff, they have quotas and they try to stick to it.
Yeah, why not? Debt swap, there are issues with that. It depends what's being strung to it. So let's put this a little bit aside. But it's a good thing if it's in adaptation. So they allow us to do things in adaptation. Adding to what Leah has said, climate finance is critical because you cannot work without having money. And since most vulnerable countries are developed and least developed countries, and they are mired in debt, they need some support, so they need to find where the money comes in. Even Europe, even the US, when they're looking at, these are the two latest developed, if you will, plans, there was a lot of back and forth and negotiations over where the money comes from. And lobbying plays a huge role in both of these groupings. In the US, the car lobbies, the fossil fuel lobbies, the mining lobbies, they are all into, they've got their tentacles into government. So they try to control climate finance. Biden got around it, called it Inflation Reduction Act. So we're working with inflation, not with climate. So that's a spin word. However, in terms of getting mitigation funding, keep always in mind that, as Leah is saying, there's a lot of technology. And most of the producers of this technology are not the developing countries, they are developed countries. So what they do is, they send you the technology strung along with a consultant that is from that part of the world, plus they tie back to you to buy their technology. So it is out of the right pocket into the left, a little bit less into the left, and then you're strung up and hung with those. It is in their interest to meet their taxpayers' demands and their taxpayers' money, fine. We should be a little bit smarter. And I think in Lebanon we're doing a good job. I think your team has but the ministry has been doing a really good job in terms of climate action and mainstreaming climate action into many aspects. So this is something that we can work on, and this will sort of incorporate into different ministries' budgets, climate action.
Okay. Around this, there are two online questions that we'd like to also give the floor. One is from Dilara. Her question has the country, Lebanon, developed any specific policies or national programs to help in correcting or challenging environmental problems? This is one. And the second is from Alain Dow. How can we ensure access and proper management of funds in weak states or unstable states, such as Lebanon, Libya, and others? Maybe Camille one, and then Leah, go ahead, and then we'll give to Camille.
I don't have a
Leah.
In terms of policies for environment, في policies for environment and في policies for climate change. أكيد Lebanon has been, we have the first environmental law which was done in '94. Law 444 is the framework law that actually regulates and is the chapeau law of all environmental regulations in Lebanon. And we do have regulations that go from polluter pays principle, compliance law, solid waste, wastewater, air emissions, but also environmental police enforcement. This is a big topic, and definitely we are not lagging behind. There's question mark on the enforcement as such regulations and laws, but the laws are there and we're still working, and it's work in progress. In terms of climate change law, there's two laws, the ratification of the UNFCCC and the ratification of the Paris Agreement. Under these laws, we have the nationally determined contribution, which is the national climate change policies that determines, on one hand, how much we should or we commit to reduce in terms of emissions by 2030, and our target is 20% emission reductions up to 31% by 2030, wholly conditional, unconditional goals. And also this policy identifies 7 priority areas for adaptation, so that it sets the government very clear vision vis-à-vis the national stakeholders, but also vis-à-vis the global community. And this is our target, these are our priority areas, and we are working towards reaching these 2 targets. In terms of, what was the other question? In terms of
unstable state.
عم نتعذب.
Unstable state, such as Lebanon, Libya, and how is climate finance, the mechanisms?
It's very challenging. Today, most of the financing is going through implementing entities, يعني مثل UNDP, the UN agencies, or other accredited entities that are trusted, that they can channel the money to the right end, and that the money that is planned to be spent on specific set of activities is actually meeting its purpose. We're still in the gray zone in terms of banking sector, financial sector, restructuring. We're trying to establish the Lebanon Green Environment Facility to try to find alternative way to still channel climate finance and investments that are low carbon and climate resilient. فيها ما تكون climate finance, and it can be pure business perspective investment, but let's make sure that they are low carbon and climate resilient. We're trying to see what is the best financial mechanism. I think if I'm a good student to Vahaken, I think we're there, and I think something is gonna see the light very soon.
Great. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yusra, and then first, go ahead.
Hi, Yusra Bitar, Research Fellow with the Arab Reform Initiative. I think my question is more about alternative economies, because for me, the elephant in the room for a lot of us is the economy is based on accumulation, whether it's green or not green. And as we know, the severity of the climate crisis, I think we all feel it more and more each day. So what are the kinds of conversations you're having in terms of alternative economies, ones that aren't about more and more consumption, especially in the Emirates? Is that even a conversation to begin with? I assume it's a no, but within the work you do internally, how do you approach it? Yes.
Yes,
the
answer is no, but even worse than that is the whole discussion on the carbon cycle, which is very negative for climate action. That includes everything related to carbon capture, storage, etc., which is for them a way to talk about circular economy. So the Gulf countries are trying to put this carbon cycle under circular economy. It has not worked yet, but yes, unfortunately, alternative economies are more under these titles than others. Another negative thing is the whole business of city building, with NEOM, with all this. I mean, it's really industrial level of greenwashing, very sophisticated, very powerful, and a lot of actors are falling in the trap. There's nothing green about these projects. There's nothing circular about these projects. And sorry again to be pessimistic on that and to answer like this to your question.
I want to chime in on this. Habib Malouf would be happy hearing us here. the way we are structured, the way the globalization has structured the world is as a consuming society. We are into consuming huge amount of things needlessly at times. So forget anything close to coming into green or circular economies for that. However, this is where we see patches of, optimism in the darkness of conflict. What happened in Lebanon, the way suddenly we jumped into solar powered renewable energy, all of a sudden. The same thing happened in Yemen. The very same thing happened in Yemen. So it is sort of ad hoc, nothing planned. So the scary part is the life cycle assessment of these things. So if we are going to shift to any kind of thinking, it is best to go into life cycle assessment of any endeavor that we undertake, whether production, whether buildings, NEOM, and everything you can do, I can do better between the Gulf countries. So once you get into that, there is nothing going there. But at the same time, there is another competition going on. I'm green, then you become greener, then I'm greener than you. So there is that spin coming in, and the green buildings that are, green building societies are coming up. The LEED certification, BREEAM certifications, they are gaining traction. So there are things that are happening. There are markets happening within, within your green economy. So you don't really need to jump into something that is totally a new philosophy of consumerism or change. Work the system and gradually work it. We don't have the luxury of time, unfortunately, but if we work within a system and we keep pushing, George and his friends keep pushing governments and keep pushing society, then we as academics can put in the numbers, let facts talk. It becomes a very narrow wiggle room for others to work within. So we need to narrow the wiggle room and not let the market dictate, let humanity dictate. I don't know if I answered that, but this is my philosophy.
We'll take a question with the stripe. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I have two questions. My first question is on the GCC. So Mr. Amoun, you were saying that GCC countries are kind of basically playing a loophole. You said they use less fossil fuels nationally and then sell more globally. So my question here is that, would you say, maybe also Leah, would you say that the NDCs, like this could be a loophole in the NDCs in the sense that they aren't enough because they perceive performance as only what you're doing nationally, but then some countries find a loophole like the GCC countries and then perform better nationally and then sell to other countries? And my second question is on the role of the private sector. Do you believe that private companies should have a bigger role in COPs? Since you have some private companies like Big Oil, but other companies as well, who have bigger footprints than some countries. So one on finance, Dr. Farajalla, you were saying that we should include more private companies in climate finance. So would you say, for example, Big Oil under the polluter pays or others? And can we ever consider these big oil companies or other companies, private companies, as allies or accomplices to the climate movement? Or because historically they are the major reason why we are here, they can never actually be allies, even if they do the green transition and all this greenwashing? So, yeah.
I'm going to quickly answer on the NDCs and net zero targets of Gulf countries. Yes, as I said, they are happy to mitigate in order to consume less locally and sell more globally. But there are also other blocking factors that are really even sometimes very technical. Why don't they have more ambitious renewable targets, for example? Well, one of the main technical blocking factor in the UAE in Dubai mostly, but also in other Gulf countries, is desalination, water desalination. 99% of their water use is desalinated, and they are very intensive, water-intensive economies. But how is it desalinated? Through cogeneration. What does it mean? Cogeneration, you have a thermal plant burning gas, producing waste heat, and with this waste heat, they make a turbine work, I'm simplifying, to desalinate water. So water is a byproduct of fossil fuel electricity. If they want to switch off thermal plant and turn these megawatts into solar megawatt, they will need to also use more solar megawatt, renewable megawatts, to make to desalinate water through other technologies like reverse osmosis, etc. So there are even technical factors that are blocking NDCs in Gulf countries to be more ambitious, not only political. For private companies, I don't have an answer, but maybe I have an idea, but not an answer.
Private companies at the COP. Leah and maybe George as well.
Maria. Yeah, Maria. Okay, so private sector. I think they are allies. I don't see private sector as, they caused the problem, so now they're brainwashing us, are paying their dues by transitioning into the green economy. I think that there's a very clear, a sincere interest, not all, but there are some companies that are sincerely committed to lead on the energy transition and to lead and to lobby. It's not just what they do, but also the way they influence the government to actually do more and be more ambitious. And we cannot alienate their role. When we talk about greenhouse gas emissions or the carbon footprint of a country, who is the country? It's people, it's us, industries, businesses. They are the consumers. They are the end consumers. Just like you raise awareness and you build capacities and you try to change behavior of people so that there's an impact on your carbon footprint. The private sector is just as important as switching off a power plant or moving into renewable energy. And there was a question about NDCs, Zafi loopholes in NDCs. Yes, but then again, a nationally determined contribution is how much, in a very technical term, is how much you are emitting at your national territories. Who is consuming the fuel that you are producing is not your responsibility. They're very technical. I'm not talking policy or politics. So you can consume less, but generate the same amount or more and do your calculation. At the end of the day, you will have a consumer somewhere that will be using your fuel and that will have a higher carbon footprint. However, as a global community and not as an individual country, our objective is to limit the production, and this is why you see in the Glasgow decision in the COP26, for the first time ever in climate change history, you see phase down of fossil fuels. Phase down, مش phase out, and this was a big debate. It wasn't there in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I'm not sure that you will find it in Dubai's in COP28 decision, but this is already a lobby, an international influence and international pressure for countries that find loopholes to minimize their loopholes and eventually to remove the loopholes.
Just to continue on what you were saying, Leah, private sector and exporting emissions through exporting oil and gas, even national oil companies, ADNOC, Aramco, etc., have net zero targets to green extraction and production. So it's interesting to look at this also as private actors noting that on methane and everything, noting that investing in greening extraction and oil production, because it's very CO2, it's a very CO2 intensive industry, only extraction and production. Investing in these technologies locks also these countries in these sources of revenue, in these incomes, away from economic diversification. So it's also a factor. I'm not saying it's not good to green extraction and to have net zero emissions to companies like Aramco and ADNOC, but it locks more these countries in oil and gas extraction.
More and more. Couple of things. Greenwashing is the name of the game these days. Sports washing is catching up, but greenwashing is it. And Total became Total Energies, right? So we're talking about energy and all that. Fine, this is in response to consumer pressure. So we need to keep that up. Another thing is, to me, yeah, I mean, we need to keep, as consumers, we need to keep pressure. As governments, we need to be aware of that. Many governments are beholden to big oil companies. And oil companies own some of these countries. Think about the uranium in Mali, right? Mali, we had the coup d'etat, right? Niger had the coup d'etat. Look at the price of uranium that they were selling to France versus how much it's in the market. More than 100 times more, or close to. So oil companies can control these things and governments can. However, I want to raise a flag about this net zero business. Net zero does not mean zero emissions, okay? That's the bottom line. It means I can go keep producing whatever I want. I go to some poor, destitute country, buy their emissions for nothing, and then say, look, I'm net zero, and keep doing what I'm doing. So that's an area that we can work on and focus on better. And this is where the net zero claims of many countries and companies need to be publicly and clearly presented, transparently presented, so that you can follow the dollar. If you cannot follow the dollar, you know that something is not kosher. Okay?
Antoine.
There's a growing movement that is looking to nuclear energy as a possible alternative. And I was wondering if we can do a round with each and every one of you very quickly, just to, I'm curious about your individual positions regarding nuclear energy as a viable alternative. Thank you.
Maybe we start.
I'd love to start on this.
You, and then we go to Camille.
This is another cop-out. Nuclear energy, look at 3 Mile Island. Look at Chernobyl. Look at Japan, Kyoto. Look at all of those, okay? This is a disaster waiting to happen. And in countries where these are countries, most of them are countries with strict oversight and quality control and measures. What happens if this proliferates? God help us. And this is a typical example of kicking the can down the road. What do we do with the nuclear waste? Find a coal mine in some country, put the nuclear waste deep into the ground, and then wait for the next generations, not generation, generations, to find a solution for it. This is a cop-out of the first degree. This is totally unjustifiable and not according, if you adhere to climate justice, this is not. Climate justice is not for our people right now on Earth, it's for the people that are coming in. So that's one point that is critical that we need to. And why invest in nuclear now where we can invest in renewables, in different forms of renewables, in different transitions where we can weave in different forms of energy that produce, that satisfy our energy needs. Why are we going down that route? Who is pushing for that? I think it's terrible for the environment and for humans.
بدي هلا نحن بهيدي السيشن في تحركات لمنظمة جرين بيس باليابان من وراء هذا الموضوع بالذات اللي عم تحكي عنه أنطوان، ومن وراء النوكلير ويست، لأنه هن أخذوا قرار بالآخر مش قادرين بقى يستوعبون على الأراضي تبعهم، سو قرروا يكبون بالبحر. هيدا معناتها إنه وحدة من أكبر البلدان يلي بتعتمد فيها على الثروة السمكية وعندها من الأكثر أنواع بالثروة السمكية تبعها رح يكونوا عم بيكبوا لها هالنوكلير ويست هيدي. فالمنطق اللي كان عم بيحكي فيه نديم هو ذاته انه انا ليه بدي اروح استثمر بحط مصرياتي بهالطاقه النوويه وافتح سوق الطاقه النوويه بكل العالم. يعني اذا هلا في شويه ريستريكشنز على الموضوع هون وهون وهون رح يبطل فيه، وحط هيدا الخطر على مستقبل اجيال واجيال لقدام. يعني عم نلاقي حل هلا وعم نخلق مشكله لبعدين، عم نلاقي حل لمشكله هلا من خلال خلق مشكله جديده عم نفتحها. صح هيدا هلا التسويق الاكبر، وبالكوب بس يلي رايحين او يلي رح يروحوا رح تشوفوا في ستاند يمكن مساحته قد هيدا المبنى لانه هن اكثر ناس معهم مصاري، فكله بس فقط للتسويق لهالفكره انه اوكي بدكم كلايمت تشينج، بدكم تتخلصوا من هالتغيير المناخي اللي عم بيصير، الطاقه النوويه هي الحل. فلا هي مشكله اكثر من ما هي حل، وفي حركه اعتراضيه كثير كبيره عليها. شكرا.
And my point of view, I don't think there's a technology that can be excluded under this crisis. If you see the sixth assessment report, the latest IPCC assessment report, you see that the projections in all scenarios we can never reduce enough greenhouse gas emissions to reach the 1.5 or the 2 if we don't rely on geoengineering, carbon capture and storage, and technologies that might be controversial. So the idea is how much do we use from which technology? And this is a question of marginal abatement costs. You have technologies that have the least cost on society, on environment, on resources, and financial cost that can give you the best emission reduction potential. And you have technologies that are more costly with, for every $1 you invest, you have less emission reductions or you have more environmental damage. So it's a question of balance, I think. It depends on countries. It depends also on how much we need by when and which technology can accelerate the transition. It can be temporary. It can be temporary for, let's say, a specific period of time so that the world gets stabilized again in terms of concentration pathways in the atmosphere. So I wouldn't say it's a yes, but I wouldn't say also it's a no-go.
Okay, my turn, I guess. I will agree with Leah, actually, that we cannot exclude any technology that contributes to solving the climate crisis that we're in today. But I have a little caveat. First, in the Gulf, we have an efficiency problem because the water that is used to cool the reactors is desalinated water. I had the number in mind. I will have to look it up. But it decreases tremendously the efficiency of the nuclear plant because it's the electricity of the nuclear plant that will be used to desalinate the water that will be used to cool the reactor. Second, again in the Gulf, to have, and that's to Nadim's point, to have a nuclear plant, very dangerous and risky facility, you need a democratic culture that allows independent agencies to check on safety and security of these facilities, and you don't have this culture of having independent agencies in the GCC. And finally, why I do not exclude nuclear energy as Leah said, as a transition fuel for the next 50 years, probably given the lifespan of a reactor. It's because when you burn fossil fuel, the catastrophe is part of the process. when you use uranium to produce electricity, nuclear energy to produce electricity, the environmental damage is an accident. Yes, it's a catastrophic accident, but it's an accident, and it's big but localized. Nadim is gonna kill my argument, I know.
There is nothing temporary about nuclear. It is never temporary. It is a long-lasting, the half-life of these things stay, and they stay radioactive, and they are a detriment to anything that they come in touch with. Why should we put ourselves in such a position now while trying to solve a problem and create another one? There is enough money that can go into research, and this is something I did not address earlier. The funding that goes into research is driven money. It is no longer government money, it is company money, and it diverts your research. A lot of the research, and the pharmaceuticals are the greatest example in this. Research is money driven these days instead of knowledge driven in its predominance. So we can get into good science that comes up with good transitions for us, anything but nuclear. That's, I agree. We cannot discount anything, but we can discount nuclear, and we can do away with that. Let us focus on things that we can achieve without the hazard of nuclear.
Okay, thank you, Nadim. I'd like to, you have a question? Maybe we'll take one last question, and then we'll give the floor to, we're happy to continue if everyone is okay.
I'm Carol Azar, Professor of Electrical Engineering. Thank you for an enlightening contributions from many sides, I would say. From an engineering point of view, there is the green hydrogen technology. I don't know if you are familiar with that. Grosso modo, it's about sending high currents and superconductors and being able to break the molecules of air in order to isolate the hydrogen molecule without the other polluting technologies. So I address myself to the panel to see if they know more about this new research, especially in France, I think.
And even in Lebanon.
This is what I have heard, but I would like to learn more about this matter.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. This is a very good question. We have a paper on its way on green hydrogen. Go ahead.
Yes, well, hydrogen is the talk of the day. In my humble opinion, hydrogen is not a fuel. It's a way for storing energy and transporting it efficiently with a lot of losses in the process. So why build solar panels and renewable power plant to take hydrogen and transform air or water into hydrogen and sell it and transport it, instead of building this solar with all the losses that it implies, instead of building solar panel and renewable plants to directly link them to the grid. I'm not convinced by hydrogen personally, but I'm sure you know.
No, I agree with you. The green part of it is that green hydrogen uses a lot of water. And the process of it, you need fossil fuel to first start the process. So you're still using fossil fuel. The other thing is, when we're talking about the fission versus fusion question, this is something that is very promising in terms of nuclear. Right now, it's all fusion. So we're splitting atoms, we're creating unstable, whereas in fusion, we're putting together atoms and creating those that are much more stable without any waste. So there is a lot of technology going in, a lot of money can go into those if we stop funding wars and destruction. There's a lot of money there.
Thank you. We'll take, you want to ask her? Then 20 seconds, quickly. No, microphone, because we can't hear you and we need translation.
It's actually concerning fusion. How is it looking on an international scale investment?
Use this.
I was asking about fusion. You already mentioned it, يعني. How is it looking on an international scale نسبة لinvestment, feasibility? يعني, could this be a sort of like a save the world technology, or is it not looking very bright? يعني?
Leia said it, there is no silver bullet, there is no one thing that works. It's coming. How soon? We don't know. But in the meantime, we have to work on getting our emissions reduced drastically. Maybe then that comes in as maybe final solution amongst others. But yeah, it is coming. There have been several two so far that I know of that have been successful. They were able for a significant amount of time, which is in nanoseconds, or now milli, I'm not sure which time period, but it's happening. I remember back in 1989 maybe, at the University of Utah, there was this big deal about a French scientist, successfully conducting a fusion experiments. They were nobody was able to replicate it. Now, recently, within the past year, if I'm not mistaken, the experiment was replicated. So we have two experiments that show fusion works. It is way down the road for it to be commercialized, but now I think it's getting on track. So there is hope on that sense, on that side.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. We'll give 30 seconds per panelist as a closing remark. As we are moving forward in an uncertain times, and we don't know even where the next conference of parties beyond UAE will be, given that Russia and China, one of the largest polluter, is also hindering this process. How do you see the way forward, given also the regional political dimensions that we are going through, and at the same time the issues of governance and decision making and creating more democratic spaces for civil society actors and others to help our governments accountable, as well as the international donors who have their own agenda to support and continue on supporting wars and conflicts in our region. Camille, George, Leia, and then we'll end with Nadim. 30 seconds and then we'll give the floor to Antoine.
It's a very complex question, and my straight answer is I don't know. I don't know. But yes, strengthening democratic institutions is definitely something that I think is key to beside all the technological elements that we talked about and the policies that we talked about that are imperfect, the targets that are not ambitious enough. I think increasingly people are aware of the climate crisis. Few years ago, we stopped talking about climate deniers, although they still exist, but they're not as vocal, which is a huge step. And yes, having democratic institutions that allow people to vote in people that will tackle their fears, if climate is one of their fears, I think is a way forward. And maybe to end on a positive note.
George?
كان 30 ثانية قليل للسؤال كتير كبير. بس اللي بدي أقوله رح أرجع شديد على شغلة واحدة أو قبل ما أحكي فيها. السنة الماضية نحن رحنا على كوب، كان السبونسر تبعه كوكا كولا. That was the joke of the COP السنة الماضية. منيح الإمارات مش بحاجة لسبونسر، سو ماشي الحال. لا يلي بدي أقوله الأهم نحن خليني أسميها معركة عم نشتغل أو عم نخوضها، إنه ما يتحول الكوب لمؤتمر تو جرين ووش سياسات الحكومات يلي الموجودة هلا. هيدي أهم نقطة عم نحكيها. بدي ارجع هيك شدد على نقطة قلتها قبل. نحن فعليا اللي عم نحاول انه نكون عم نعمله عم نوقف بوجه نفس الحكومات والأنظمة يلي هي عم بتكون المسبب الأكبر والأول واللي هي مطالبة بدفع مستحقات والأضرار يلي عم تتسبب فيها للدول الأكثر تضرراً وهي بطبيعة الحال الأكثر فقراً بالعالم. هي ذاتها هيدي الدول يلي عم تتسبب بالضرر العام لكوكبنا والتغير المناخي. هي ذاتها إذا بتشوفوها وبتحطوا الأسامي وبتشوفوا الأرقام قدامكم هي أكثر دول مسببة أو مصنعة للأسلحة ومسببة للحروب يلي عم بتصير حوالي الأرض. فبرجع بدي أترك هيدي الفكرة إنه عم ندمر أرضنا وكوكبنا وعم ندمر الإنسان اللي فيه. شو رايحين نعمل بالكوب؟ شو رايح أنا أعمل 20 يوم بالكوب؟ كل شيء معقول يكون يطلع بإيدي لحتى نحن نضلنا قادرين ندفش مثل ما قال نديم، ندفش حكوماتنا وسياسات الحكومات لتقدر توصل لمطرح تعمل سياسات تفيد البشرية بدل ما تكون مسبب لكل هالضرر اللي عم تتسبب فيه. شكرا.
Way forward, directly, a big expectation from COP28 to deliver on the loss and damage, and from a pure negotiation point of view, deliver on loss and damage operationalization, finalize at least the framework for the global goal of adaptation. We've been working on it for the last 2 years. We are very much looking forward for the global stocktake to understand where we are and where we're heading to. And these are very important parking, where the whole community, the whole universe slows down and assesses where we are and where we're going. Finally, it's the indirect expectation, something that I really like about COPs. It creates a momentum, خاصة the last 2 COPs. It creates a momentum where you guys are actually asking. I didn't see such a panel, let's say, of such an audience in Warsaw in 2018. هذا كان ما بتتذكروا. أو وقتها in Glasgow. So the fact that you have COPs وهلأ 2 COPs in the Arab region creates a beautiful momentum where people, at least in Lebanon, start to be interested in climate change. They ask about it. Media is covering a lot about climate change, and I think this is an opportunity for all of us to showcase what we're doing, but also to listen and to see what Lebanese citizens and the Lebanese community wants.
Thank you. And I want to second Leah. The stock taking is, to me, quite important. لأن صار لنا كذا سنة عم نحكي I'll stick to Arabic. عم نحكي بالstock taking وين وصلنا والNDCs وشو صرنا عاملين. طيب ويننا هلا؟ هيدا كتير مهم. هيدا أنا to me إذا فينا نضلنا على هاي يطلع منا شيء، لأنه loss and damage بدهم يجرجروا فينا لآخر أيامات الجرجرة، لأنه مش رشا وتشاينا اللي عم بيعرقلوا، أمريكا ويوروب اللي عم بيعرقلوا. هاو اللي عم بيعرقلوا أكتر ناس، ومش مقصرين الصين يعني، ما مش إنه هاو بس بين أمريكا والصين سعيدة. So to me كلبنان فينا نحن لازم نكون أنانية قد ما فينا، ناخد قد ما فينا، نغرف قد ما فينا ناخد، ونحط عنا قد ما فينا نتعلم، ونعمل شبكات تواصل بالكوبس. هيدول يعني كنا كIFI نروح على الكوب كتير، رحنا مع الوزارة، يعني كنا تقريبا كل كوب رحنا، آخر 2 كوبس ما رحنا for different reasons. بس الحلو هنيك الكونكشنز يلي بتصير، يلي فينا نفرجي انه نحن كاكاديميك انستتيوشن ايدنا بايد الدولة وعم نشتغل سوا حتى نجرب نوصل لهدف بيفيد لبنان. ساعتها بيقدر اذا حدا جهة مانحة، حدا جروب في بيسس اساس لحتى يقولوا والله هاو عم بيشتغلوا مع بعض، الدولة عم بترك على الأكاديمية عندها حتى تقدر تساعدها. والدولة عم بتساعد أكاديمية حتى يقدروا هن يعملوا شغل له عازي. هيدا أنا بالنسبة إلي الكوب، ولازم يضلوا يمشي لقدام حتى نقدر نفرجي نحن شو عنا. Thank you.
Thank you one more time for all the different panelists and the audience here in person and those who are watching us online. We will be releasing a short summary of 2 pages in the next few weeks with the major interventions that were discussed. And I'd like to end, of course, to thank our host institution, but also these kinds of partnership, and to remind ourselves the different challenges that we are facing individually and collectively when we are still at war and injustices are happening every single day. So thank you again for your time, and Antoine, تفضل.
It's always nice to work with friends. Thank you, Sarine, Camille, George, Leah, Nadim. This was a very interesting conversation, a very timely one as well. So, for those who don't know, this was the 5th installment of the Roundtable series, Navigating Climate Change and Environmental Activism in the MENA region, Challenges and Opportunities. We have the 6th one, the final one actually of the series, which will take place on November 27th. It will be a whole afternoon, a forum with different speakers, some of them actually flying in to Beirut. And the theme will be climate cooperation in the MENA and Mediterranean regions, critical perspectives and pathways to success. We'll be looking into how we can make sure that climate action is transcending borders. How can we enable cooperation in a region where cooperation is, to say the least, not usually favored or at least accessible. So once again, on behalf of the AUB Nature Conservation Center and the Arab Reform Initiative, I want to thank the panelists and the audience for attending, and hope we'll see you amongst us on November 27th. Have a good day.